Okay everyone, so in front of me now I have opened the CLAT 2024 paper and let's go through it together and see what we can learn or how we should attempt each section. So this year, as expected, we had a different weightage of each section because it was a new pattern, that is 120 questions. So for English we had 24 questions, for current affairs we had 28 questions, for legal we had 32 questions, for logical we had again 24 questions, and then for quantitative techniques we had 12 questions. So I started with English. So let's talk about English first. So this time English was a very literature heavy section and all we had to do was read the passage and solve it accordingly. Now if we look at these passages, they were very contextual and there wasn't a lot to think about over here. We directly had to read from the passage, pick out the correct option and apply it. The passages were shorter than expected as well and it was an easy read and therefore English could have been solved really fast. So this year, instead of a lot of students doubted themselves when they attempted English because they thought that maybe they're doing something wrong because it's going too easily or it's going too well. That is a position where you need to have confidence in yourself. I finished the English section in about 15 minutes and I was surprised myself and I thought maybe I should recheck it, but then I realized that I should not be wasting time at this moment second guessing myself and I quickly moved on to the next section. One of the most controversial sections this year, it was current affairs or general knowledge. Now this was very reading comprehension heavy this time, which did not make a lot of sense to a lot of people because they thought GK is not supposed to come like this. Again, it had just a little bit of static in it as well, and of course the topics, most passages were based on current. So again, this section was the most controversial section this year, and of course the people who were able to solve it properly maybe got an edge in their score or their rank. So the first passage we had was about the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, which was a static passage technically because it had nothing to do with the current, and this had one of the most controversial questions as well, which was, why did General Dyer order to fire in the crowd? Most people thought the answer would be D, but the correct answer given by the consortium is C, which I believe does make a little sense because if we were to enforce the martial law, then it would just mean scattering the crowd. But especially firing on a peaceful concession is a bit beyond just enforcing a law, and therefore it seems that General Dyer might have been enforcing or teaching the crowd a lesson instead of just enforcing a law. So this was a very static based passage and most of the questions were be able to answer reading comprehension wise. This was a little static. This was reading comprehension, question number 26. Question number 27 was again reading comprehension based. Question 28 was reading comprehension based. Question 29 was reading comprehension based. And question 30 was static based. So you can see that most of these questions were reading comprehension based, which is not something you expect from GK. Similarly, the second passage which we had was also very current based, but a lot of questions could again be answered using reading comprehension skills. So therefore this was again a little controversial because why do we have so much reading comprehension being applied in GK? So when I first encountered GK and I started reading it, I knew that okay, maybe to question 25 is simply a static question and I was able to answer it. But when I read this question which said, why did General Dyer order to fire on the crowd? Now this starts to ring alarm bells in your mind because these kind of questions is not what you expect from normal GK. That's when I went back and read the passage once more, this time properly, in thinking about reading comprehension in my mind, that maybe the answers are in the passage all along. So once I did that and then I went through the passages again, I realized that that was the right choice to make. Because of course these passages are given in the paper, so maybe they serve some purpose and we should not be skipping them. And that is something which made all the difference because in all these passages, suppose in the Gaza Hamas passage, again a lot of questions were based on reading comprehension. In this passage, the ISRO passage, a lot of questions were again based on reading comprehension, although this was the most current heavy topic. There was reading in comprehension involved, but again. Then the next passage was G20. This is the one sole passage which was entirely current based. There was no reading comprehension involved in this one. So it might have been helpful to some students. But of course, by and large, this entire GK section was very reading comprehension heavy, which did not make a lot of sense for GK passages. Therefore, it confused and maybe dropped the score of a lot of students. And what we noticed was that students who had been preparing for a while or had very strong command over GK lost their edge which they had in this paper, which was disappointing for a lot of contestants. Now this last passage, it is a very famous speech by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So of course, some people might try to call it static because it is a famous speech, but all the questions in this passage were entirely reading comprehension based. We just had to read this entire passage and apply it to answer all these questions. If you take this passage up and put it in English, nobody would question anything and it would just make sense. Yeah, this makes sense. This is an English passage. So again, this was a very controversial passage because why does this passage exist in GK? But of course, GK is current knowledge and there are passages given. So you are expected to do that much. And from that, we have learned now that expect the unexpected, read all the passages and answer the questions accordingly. So the extra time which I had saved in English by solving it in 15 minutes, I was able to use that in GK because once I realized what kind of questions are being asked, I knew that I had to read the passages in GK and solve it properly. So therefore I gave more time to GK because in my mocks I used to give 5-10 minutes to GK. I just breeze through the passages and mostly focus on just answering the questions properly. But here I realized that I need to actually read the passage properly, which made some difference. But again, I end up spending a lot of time on GK, which I usually did not expect. But again, I had saved some time in English, so I was able to utilize it properly. Now, legal reasoning. Legal reasoning was the most uncontroversial part of this paper, let's say. Most of the passages were based on current legal knowledge. So that is something which helped some students, and it also which was, I guess, hampered the performance of some students who were not able to manage current legal knowledge well. But if you're up to date with the news, if you're up to date with the newspaper, then all of these topics might have felt familiar to you, and so legal reasoning could have been handled really well. There were 1 or 2 controversial questions in between, which maybe we'll dive down deep into when in the future videos we do deep analysis of each and every question of the paper. But by and large, legal reasoning was an uncontroversial passage, and I was able to solve it in a standard amount of time, like maybe 5-7 minutes for each passage. So legal reasoning did not pose a lot of issues. Then we move on to the most controversial topic apart from GK this year, which was logical reasoning. Now logical reasoning, I'd say, was the most difficult this year. Not difficult compared to last year's standard or any other year's standard, but in this paper, this was the most difficult section. Of course, in an average scale, we'd say maybe it was moderate. But if we compare it to the rest of this paper itself, then it was the most difficult section, and it had some of the most controversial or maybe let's say confusing passages as well. Especially, there were some corrections made in the end which did not make sense to a lot of students. Some students proposed some suggestions which were not accepted. So of course, logical reasoning was again a very controversial section this year. But especially controversial was this particular section, this particular passage, which was, imagine you have been appointed as a consultant for a manufacturing company. This did not make sense for a lot of students because this isn't what the normal GK people are used to, or the normal analytical reasoning, logical reasoning questions people are used to, because normally we study assumption, inference, conclusion, and that's it. But here we noticed that we had to work as a consultant and apply our brains accordingly. So this was something which was entirely new to a lot of students, and some people were able to tackle it and some people weren't. So we'll also discuss this passage deeply when we dive deep down into our analysis. But what we need to understand is that these kind of passages apparently can come now. So instead of just practicing normal standard questions of critical reasoning, at this point we need to start diversifying our sources just a little bit and be prepared for these kind of passages. So some reading, more comprehension passages, and some analytical reasoning is also going to help you in solving these kind of passages. So keep in mind that some new passages can come, some new patterns you can encounter, and not everything will be like the mocks. So this was a very new passage, and maybe we'll discuss it deeply when we do a deep dive in into all the questions and solve all the sections properly right on this channel. Finally, we'll move on to the last section, which was quantitative techniques. The quantitative techniques, I've told everyone a lot of times that this is a very scoring section, and we should not be losing marks in it at all, because we only get 10th level maths by and large in CLAT, and that is something which we all have done, which we all can do. So this is something which I expect all of you to practice really well for CLAT 2025 so that you do not miss out on these marks. Now of course, if you had practiced a lot of maybe let's say legal edge mocks or other coaching mocks, maybe LPT, CLAT prep, career launcher, most of the mocks had 3 passages with 4 questions each, because we had predicted that there would be 12 questions. So that's the split everybody was going with. But here we realized there were only 2 passages with 6 questions each. So that is something which made it a little easier for a lot of people. And if you were able to manage your time efficiently and properly throughout the rest of the paper, you had enough time to solve these 2 passages. Of course, one of these passages was more difficult than the other, and there was calculation to be done. But if you saved your time efficiently and if you had practiced calculation well, then you would be able to deal with it and get a decent or maybe full marks as well in quantitative techniques, because this is one of the only sections in the CLAT exam pattern where you can score full marks. So that is how I went about the paper. By the time I reached quantitative techniques section, I had about 25 minutes to half an hour left, because I had saved a lot of time in the reading comprehension sections, because I realized that maybe this is an easy paper, and instead of second guessing myself, I should be focusing on attempting more and more as quickly as I can, so that I can give more time to QT as well and I can solve it the entirety of it. So QT is something which you guys should not be skipping. Always attempt the entire QT, never let it go, because these are 12 marks which you can secure for yourselves assuredly if you practiced really well. So if we move on to the overall analysis of the paper once more, if we see each section, we can see that English was easy, very easy, and it was literature heavy. So this needed to be done really fast. Current affairs again was technically easy because you had to read the passages and answers, so it is easier than knowing the actual answers, but again it was unpredictable. It was unpredictable, it was new, and therefore it confused a lot of students. It was unexpected, and therefore a lot of students lost marks here. Moving on to legal reasoning. Legal reasoning again was relatively easy, and it was current based. Legal reasoning was very current based, and if you had read the newspapers properly, if you had kept up with current affairs and current legal knowledge, then you might have been able to deal with it properly. Then moving on to logical reasoning, I'd say logical reasoning was moderate, if not difficult. Some people will say it was easy to moderate, but I'd say no, it was definitely moderate to difficult, and especially considering the final answer key, a lot of students lost marks here which they did not expect to lose, and therefore I'd say logical reasoning was slightly unexpected and obviously moderate to difficult. So a lot of students lost marks here, and of course a lot of questions were controversial as well. Quantitative techniques again was easy, but it was a little lengthy and you had to do a lot of calculations. So you had to save some extra time for it, but if you were able to save that time, then you do really well in quantitative techniques. And if you practiced well only these basic topics, all we had to do this year was arrange the data, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, ratios. That's it. If you had done all those basic topics really well, you'd be able to secure 12 or 12 for you this year. So this is a knowledge which you need to learn from this paper, that always practice quantitative techniques. At the very least, do the basics so that if passages like these come, you can attempt them. In the reading sections, we learned that we should believe in ourselves, and if the paper seems easy, maybe it is really easy. And for GK, we learned that you need to expect the unexpected, you need to read the passages, and of course continue reading proper GK as well, because maybe the pattern shifts again and maybe we get a 2023 like paper in 2025. So that is something that we need to be prepared about. And finally, in logical reasoning, we learned something useful, that is that the patterns which we are used to, apart from that, new pattern questions can also come, so we should be prepared for them as well. So this is basically what we can learn from CLAT 2024, and this was my experience with it. Now personally, my score in CLAT 2024 was good. I scored 12 in QT and 25 in GK. The section which I lost most marks in was logical reasoning, and which is one of the reasons why I say it was moderate to difficult. So yeah, attempt this paper properly once on your own, and then maybe in future videos we will do a deep dive and analysis of each and every section and each and every question properly. We have very talented other students as well who will also discuss their paper experiences with you, and they will also help you solve these questions. So maybe you can get different perspectives on the paper, and then we can analyze the questions together so that you understand the CLAT pattern properly, and then we can do really well in CLAT 2025. All the best everyone.